And joining me now is Elisabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good evening to you, ma'am.
Good evening.
So another night, another series of Ukrainian strikes targeted at and around Crimea, this time on a key fuel supply route. I've asked the same question to a number of guests in recent days, and I wanted to put it to you too. Is the tide turning here? Is the Kremlin in real trouble?
I think it is, and the reason for that is that, as we know, oil exports are Russia's most important source of revenue. But it's also the case that the Russians themselves, in their own country, need petrol for their cars, and we are seeing, just from as a grassroots expression, we are seeing Russians either infuriated because they can't get enough fuel at the filling station, or ecstatic because they managed to find a filling station that has fuel. So if that is going to be the new reality, the fact that Russians themselves at home can't get enough fuel, or have to worry they can't get enough fuel for their cars, that may start turning the tide at home against this war. Plus, of course, if Russia can't export oil at the same volume it has been able to so far, or until recently, it's not going to get enough money to continue the war.
When it comes to the occupied Crimean territory, do you see real momentum there in Ukraine's efforts to isolate Crimea? I mean, could Kyiv really cut it off and make the territory an effective island?
That is hard to predict. What it could do, I think it's safe to say, is to make the administration of Crimea so bothersome, so complicated, so burdensome that Russia will start, or the Kremlin will start asking itself if it's worth the price. And we have to remember that administering occupied territory is always challenging, it's always costly. But Russia made a calculation in the case of Crimea that it was going to be manageable. Well, if Ukraine makes it increasingly unmanageable, if it makes it increasingly expensive, then the question will come up, perhaps not among all Russian decision makers, but certainly among some, about whether it's worth the effort. And that is quite something, and it will work in Ukraine's favor.
What does all this mean for Ukraine when it comes to that NATO summit next month, that much anticipated summit in Ankara? Does it put Kyiv squarely back on the agenda, even as we see this Iran war flare up, or both sides accusing each other of breaking the ceasefire? Do you expect the Middle East still to take the limelight?
The Middle East certainly will take a key, steal a lot of attention at the NATO summit, even though, of course, NATO is about territorial defense. It's not about wars in the Middle East, but nevertheless, it dominates the news on a daily basis, and especially now that the war seems to be back on. We have seen resumption in hostilities between the United States and Iran, or rather, Iran has just attacked a vessel, and the United States has just attacked Iran, and Iran has just attacked Bahrain. So that conflict seems to be flaring up again, despite the fact that there is a ceasefire. But Ukraine, I think, comes to the NATO summit, or the NATO summit approaches with Ukraine in a stronger position, because Ukraine is able to show that it's managing to do quite well with what it's got and what it's building at home, what it's innovating at home. And so it's not just a supplicant, it's not just there with the beggar's bowl. It is there showing that it's able to carry on defending itself despite Russia's numerical superiority.
Briefly on the Middle East, how do you assess that war right now, given these escalations we're seeing between Tehran and Washington? Is there reason to be concerned that we could be back at square one in the coming days? Maybe by the time the NATO summit happens, actually they're fighting again?
Yes, they are in fact already fighting again in a somewhat moderate fashion, but there have been hostilities again, and the risk was always with this memorandum of understanding, because it wasn't very precise. It was quite general. There was always a risk that hostilities would flare up again on the basis, let's say, with the friendly interpretation, on the basis of misunderstandings, because the memorandum of understanding is so is written in such general terms that it leaves each point open to interpretation. And what we're seeing now is Iran essentially saying we control the Strait of Hormuz and we decide who gets to enter and exit. And the Americans are saying, well, we are working with the Omanis and we have another shipping lane, so we get to decide who enters and exits there. So it's all very muddy and can lead to a further increase in hostilities. Just when we thought that we might have 60 days of something resembling a ceasefire in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz.
Certainly lots to keep an eye on there. I want to come back to Ukraine and what could be in it for Ukraine at the NATO summit next month. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, he says he will block funding for aid to Ukraine when those leaders meet in Ankara. Does that mean we will just end up seeing words on a piece of paper after the summit? Nothing more, nothing less? Perhaps some support, perhaps some condemnation of Russia? Is that a risk?
I think the odds in Ukraine's favor may be stronger now than they were 2-3 months ago, not just because of Ukraine's success primarily with its drone attacks, but also because there has been a political shift within NATO. We all know that Viktor Orban, who was the main opponent to aid to Ukraine, he lost his election, as we all know, and that leaves Robert Fico pretty much alone as a sort of a consistent objector to aid to Ukraine. Now, we don't know how Donald Trump will approach Ukraine and the need for more support of Ukraine, but it is the case that Slovakia is not a major country, and Robert Fico in the past has been able to, or has teamed up with Viktor Orban to oppose a number of measures supporting Ukraine. Now with Viktor Orban, the leader of a larger country, no longer there, Fico is not exactly, let's say, a strong section of that NATO summit. But again, let's see what Donald Trump says. But certainly, compared to 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago, Ukraine is in a stronger position.
I'm curious, do you see much riding on Ankara? I mean, will President Trump be coming with fire in his belly? Last year we saw that on defence spending. Or could it all end up being rather toned down, perhaps even a bit boring?
President Trump doesn't do boring, and he told reporters that he's coming to Ankara because President Erdogan specifically asked him to come. So let's see what he decides to make of it. But it is the case that European leaders are in a somewhat stronger position now vis-a-vis Donald Trump. They're in theory, their ally, but he has so many other issues to worry about, including Iran, but also domestic issues, including the reflecting pool, that I think he's not going to be massively invested in making this summit some sort of marquee event from a policy perspective. Obviously, he will be, as always, the showman. But if he were massively invested in NATO, he would I think that might be, if he were massively invested in his points on NATO, that might make this, let's say, a more unpredictable affair. But now he has so many other points to worry about. And it was interesting that Secretary General Rutte went to Washington a few days ago to essentially flatter Trump, to tell him, look what you have done. You've convinced all these NATO allies to spend more on defense. So I think Rutte was going with that message in the hope that Trump will arrive in a good mood.
He delivered that infamous Trump trillion graph. Elisabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, thank you as always for your time.
Thank you.
And that's all for World News Tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World for more news and analysis. I'm Dahmen. Good night.